Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to the Bulwark. I'm very pleased to have a special video discussion today with my old friend Tom Joscelyn. Wrote such terrific pieces back in the day for the Weekly Standard and did so much work on uh, extremism and terrorism, and mostly in the Middle East and Afghanistan. But since has become an expert, unfortunately, sadly, really, on extremism and even terrorism here in the United States. Was a key staff writer on the for the January 6th House Select Committee, or main writer of that report. Uh, Excellent piece in the Bulwark yesterday. That's Monday, January 6th, on the President-elect Trump's nominee for the FBI, Kash Patel. We'll get to that in a minute. But really knows more, I think, about the whole complex of everything that lay behind January 6th and that has developed since then than almost anyone else. So, Tom, thank you for joining me, and we'll explain. So, I hope we can cover some of this here in this to help our audience understand a little better what's happening on the extreme right.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bill, for having me. I mean, this is a strange time in our nation's history. I look at all the media coverage over the last couple of days, and just amazing to see how disconnected sort of the MAGA Republican world is from the basic facts of January 6th. And I don't know how we dig ourselves out of this. I really don't. But it is quite remarkable, that we live in this broken reality now. So
Well, I don't know how we ultimately get out of it. I mean, I know how, but it's going to take a while. That's going to be difficult. But these conversations, I think, contribute. And just insisting on the truth is key. So let's spend a little time on January 6th, since you were so you know so much about it. You were such a key staffer for the committee, and then we'll get to Patel, who's obviously his nomination is pending for the second half of the conversation. But you and I were talking the other day about January 6th itself. That is to say, January 6th 4 years ago, not January 6th yesterday. Uh, where were you? What were you doing? I mean, how closely had you been following the threats of the Trump, rallying of his crowd and so forth? Where were you?
I would say between election day and January 6th, I kind of kept expecting, maybe not expecting, but hoping that Trump would sort of snap back to reality and give up his quest to overturn the election and, stop with all the lies and just finally concede to reality. And I was at home working, and then I saw on TV, I was watching parts of his speech, much of his speech. And I remember the imagery with these big screens in the background that would zoom in on his face, and the way they sort of used the imagery of that day, and then the content of his speech, which was just so remarkably incendiary. I couldn't believe the sitting president was just that full of invective and hatred for really his fellow Americans, and all based on lies about the election and his loss. And then, of course, watched the scenes unfold at the Capitol itself, and thought, boy, this is definitely a crossing of the Rubicon type of moment here, where this president and his movement have decided that they will not respect the results of a democratically held election for the first time in our nation's history. And so I was spooked. I was spooked by that, because to me it just seemed completely unreasonable and really just total madness.
I mean, you were together, I think, pretty much in being anti-Trump, and I seeing, I would say, the extremism of many of his supporters, and the authoritarianism in MAGA, and the real uh, anti-Americanism, if I can put it that way, and non-traditional conservatism, let's put it that way, that was rising on the right. But at that point, correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't yet really working on that professionally, right? You were still focused on the Middle East and Afghanistan and
Yeah, and
Al Qaeda and all that.
yeah, I wasn't. I mean, to be honest with you, I wasn't as firmly in the never Trump camp as you, right? I thought it was, I thought he was ridiculous. I thought a lot of his behavior was clownish. I thought the vulgarity that he used to win popularity was really objectionable to somebody like me. I mean, he's very vulgar, and that seemed to really appeal to his base. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories, and there's a lot of stuff that I had worries about or concerns about and didn't support. But I wasn't, totally adamantly against Trump and all manifestations of him. But that changed January 6th for me. I mean, January 6th to me, the fact that he just wouldn't respect, for the first time in our history, the results of an election, meant that I couldn't possibly vote for him again, or support him or his movement. And I still am there to this day. And, I look back at it now, and I think some of the people who were in the original Never Trump camp, like you, um, saw what was coming in a way, that basically understood, unfortunately, what was coming, and that this is the potential to be this kind of autocratic moment in our nation's history was very much seeded into his political movement.
It was, though, to be fair. I mean, it could have been. He could have stopped short as you were hoping he would, and I guess I was hoping he would too, of course, and also others could have stopped him more effectively, but I suppose by the last year or so of his administration, it was, those others weren't around much, and so
Yeah, well, I mean, that's actually the story really of January 6th. I mentioned, how we live in this broken reality, and much of the American right or all the American right either minimize January 6th or believes conspiracy theories about it and that sort of thing. And the most remarkable part about the January 6th story to me is how between Election Day 2020 and January 6th, 2021, how the principal targets for Donald Trump, the people he goes after, are principally Republicans, right? They're Republicans who are secretaries of state. They had the heads of state legislatures, governors, people within his own Department of Justice, all the way, obviously, culminating with his own vice president.
well, he
And
fires his defense secretary, Mark Esper, 4 days
yeah,
after the election, right? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's all going after people on his own side, people who are loyal to him in a lot of cases, up until that moment, including especially Pence. And so, part of what really concerns me about this broken reality is it really is wound now around the cult of personality of Trump, because you can make the case against Trump entirely within the four walls of what he did and said about other Republicans between Election Day 2020 and January 6, 2021. In fact, if you look at the January 6 committee's report, that's much of what the report is. Much of the report is all about how he's trying to pressure Republicans to help him overturn the election, and ultimately turning his rhetorical guns and using the bully pulpit against them. And so that's kind of one of my biggest concerns in all this now, is that we have such a Republican Party that's so wound around, that Trump has really kowtowed and now has total control over, that even when he turns against Republicans now, there's really no resistance at all from the right.
No, or from the party as a whole, including those who know better and just kind of acquiesce. They're the enthusiasts and then the acquiescers and the keep silencers. But let's go to the January 6th report. Liz Cheney, I think, asked you to work on to be a senior staff with the committee, really to take prime responsibility for drafting the report. You do that. You worked very hard for that year. We were in touch some. We all saw January 6th. Let's assume people watching this are probably, don't approve of it and now aren't buying the whitewashing. What
Right.
would you say, though? You learned some new things in the hearings and in the staff work and that are represented in the report. What would you, for people who haven't read all 800 pages, whatever, what would you say are the two or three things that sort of that it's slightly different or go beyond, or that would be enlightening to people who saw what happened and aren't in any way approving of it, but haven't maybe studied the report that you guys worked so hard on?
I would say the number one thing is, this wasn't a sophisticated 9/11 style terrorist attack. It isn't. And I reject that comparison entirely, what happened at the Capitol. But, and there's a but here, there was some planning between when Donald Trump announces this rally or protests on December 19th, 2020. He says it's going to be there. It'll be wild. He says in a tweet. And he calls people to, what you see from that moment, from December 19th to January 6th, really about 2.5 weeks, is these right-wing extremist groups, namely the Proud Boys, but others as well, start planning for violence on January 6th. They see Trump's words and his actions as a call to arms, and they believe that the election was stolen, and they believe that they have to stand up and fight for this disfigured patriotism that they've invested so heavily in, which is really about Trump and the MAGA movement. And so they start planning for violence. And so a crude plan does come into place. And here's the thing. It's somewhat crude, but it's successful, right? I mean, for the first time in our nation's history, the peaceful transfer of power was interrupted. And what we've seen is that the Proud Boys in particular, they did plan to harness the power of the mob that Trump sent down to the Capitol to really overrun the Capitol and stop the certification of Joe Biden's victory. And so, again, this is not an incredibly sophisticated 9/11 style terrorist plot. But it does require planning and plotting, and it was more successful, I think, than probably a lot of people would have suspected. And there were other failures built in along the way, but that's one of the biggest stories for me in all this.
Yeah, I think the report does a very good job of that, and it's not just a mob and there was bad police work, or not bad, but they got sort of overwhelmed and it just happened. That I guess the other thing for me is the inside game, so to speak, which begins before the election with Bannon and Roger Stone and Trump himself seeding the ground rhetorically, but also doing some things, I guess, to prepare in a way for the challenges that begin right after the election day with the firing of Esper and the attempts to get to the pressure
Oh,
state officials. And I feel like that the report and the hearings were so important on the kind of inside game, which people hadn't seen. I had the Justice Department the day of that hearing. I knew a fair amount, I think, of what was going on at the time. I talked to people in the Justice Department. I talked to people in the Defense Department. but the degree to which they were pushing hard internally for a coup, I guess the political scientists call it an auto coup, when you do a coup not to take power,
Self,
but to keep
yeah,
power,
right,
or self coup,
right,
whatever, the different terms. Um, uh, the degree of that, I think, is really, you guys brought out a lot, but I'm not sure people, but that's sort of then faded again because, of course, the scenes at the Capitol are the dramatic scenes, and what happens in meetings and in the Oval Office with the various, deputy attorney generals and associate attorney generals aren't quite as dramatic, but that stuff is really shocking, right?
yeah. I mean, I think to put it another way, I mean, well before January 6th, well before the election, there's plenty of evidence that Trump and his closest advisors, associates, weren't going to accept the outcome of the election should he lose, and were preparing to say that he won even when he lost. And so you see that with some of the comments that Mother Jones unearthed from Steve Bannon. You can see that in some of the footage that we got from these film producers of Roger Stone. You could see it in Trump's own words. He's asked by reporters, we respect the peaceful transfer of power, and he says we'll see. He won't commit to it. He won't commit to stepping down should he lose. And the fact that this is now all, I guess, acceptable to the American people is really the most disheartening thing to me in all this, right? Is it because this is before you even get to the violence of January 6th, before you even get to, all the claims about the committee and all the political wrangling and all this other stuff that goes on. It was so manifestly obvious that what he was doing and saying was wrong and against our democratic traditions and really opposed to it, that it's just shocking to me still shocking to me that anybody could look the other way or accept it.
I mean, even Bill Barr, who was a pretty complacent, I think, complacent, I guess is the word I'm looking for, a pretty, went along with Trump on a lot of things as Attorney General. I
Yep.
remember when he left on December 23rd, I think it was that day, that's my birthday. I remember thinking, oh my God, if Bill Barr wants to get out 1 month before, it's pointless, of course, in terms of he didn't need to leave to take a job. He didn't need to leave for some other exotic reason, right? Everyone serves out till January 20th. But the fact that he saw stuff coming that he didn't want to be a part of. Now, he wasn't a profile in courage, in my opinion. He didn't warn any of us that this stuff was coming. He didn't. He had a very fulsome letter to Trump when he left, saying what a great job Trump had done
Yep.
and all this, how proud he'd been to be part of the administration. Still, for me, that was a real warning bell. And then I was talking to some people who were close to people in the Defense Department, former senior officials there, and they were sort of very alarmed by what people, including Kash Patel, were doing over there. So you guys brought that up well in the report, I thought, both defense and justice.
Yeah, I think Bill Barr's testimony before the committee was really groundbreaking in terms of filling in a lot of details. I mean, it's very clear that he resigned because, as he's told us, he did not think that an administration should seek to stay in power based on lies. This is somebody who is the attorney general for Donald Trump. Completely loyal to him and deflecting all sorts of potentially damaging stuff from him and investigations and all that kind of thing, and very much on his side in the Mueller probe and all these other things. And yet he draws a line here, right? This is not a never Trump Republican. This is not a Democrat. This is somebody who's loyal to Donald Trump up until the very end and says, I can't go that far, And, by the way, Donald Trump continues to attack Bill Barr even after he resigns. Even you look at the January 6th speech he gave at the Ellipse on, south of the White House, he attacks Bill Barr in that speech, as he's riling up the crowd. And, there were people who were marched down to the Capitol when they go by the Department of Justice building, say, do your job and that kind of thing. They chant against the Justice Department as if the Justice Department had not done its job in all this to help Donald Trump. I mean, it's a really remarkable moment that somebody who's that loyal to Donald Trump right to the end, just like Vice President Pence, ultimately becomes a target just because he won't endorse these stupid lies about the election.
And then, yes, you say 4 years later, which was yesterday, I gotta say, it hit me a little harder. I don't know how you felt, than I expected. I mean, just that here we are 4 years later. We know everything. We know what happened publicly. We know a lot of what happened behind
Exactly.
the scenes, thanks to the committee
Yeah.
report. And incidentally, am I right about this? For all the attacks, almost all the ludicrous on the committee and how it was set up, and that they didn't, I don't know, make every single detail available, which I think you guys did, frankly, actually, on your websites to the public and so forth. Nothing in the report has been challenged, right? There are no factual. No one's saying, well, this happens in life, right? There's the Warren Commission report, and then other people say, wait a second, this isn't
Right.
a good, correct account. Here's, well, we've learned about the forensics on, I don't know much about this, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean? There's nothing like that, right? The committee's report is
Not,
stand.
not, not nothing serious. I mean, there are conspiracy theories that are wielded against it, for this or that, but nothing serious like that. I mean, no. I mean, but you said it right. like, I'm proud of the work I did on the committee. I'm proud of the committee's work. I'm proud of all the people that and what we did there, accomplished there as a team. But you didn't really need the committee to figure out what happened here, right? Or how egregious this all was, right? I mean, if you're just standing there on January 6th, watching what happened, listening to Donald Trump and seeing the consequences of his rhetoric, um, that should be enough, right? And the bottom line is that I'm sure we'll talk about this, but what worries me the most going forward is that in some ways he is sort of starting off where he left off. Like he's beginning again as a president in the second administration, having learned the first time around that he really needs people who will just be yes men, who will not actually draw the line like Bill Barr did or Vice President Pence did. And that's worrisome, right? Because, it's very easy to abuse the power of the presidency. And if you have nobody around you or very few people around you who are willing to pump the brakes, we're going to see how far he's going to push this.
And a party that is the majority party in Congress that's pretty much on board as well. So
completely compliant, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Compliant.
So let's get to just one second. I think it's an absolutely crucial point, obviously, and gets to Kash Patel. But did you feel this? The feeling I had yesterday, I've got to say, that 4 years afterwards, here he is again, no price. The stuff that most struck me, having worked in the executive branch, probably was some of the internal stuff with the Justice Department and DOD. Others were more struck by the rabble-rousing of the crowd, and God knows they should be struck by that, and the assault on the Capitol, and the police officers who were injured and so forth. So much as what could have also been struck by is taking classified documents and, shamelessly after being as an ex-president. There are so many things, and that it all didn't somehow matter. I mean, to enough people. It made me, it hit me. It hit me harder on yesterday on January 6th than it did, on the day after election day or something like that, when, even though I knew Trump had won, but somehow it just really came home to me. I don't know if you had any of that feeling, but.
I guess I could say it did, but it really didn't, because I've just been
living in it, right?
Yeah, living shocked for 4 years now that this is now acceptable to the American people. I mean, it's just, or a majority of voters anyway. I mean, or at least 49 some odd percent of voters. I mean, to me, it's it's all terribly shocking. But a point you just raised there is very important, I think, which is you're talking about the different things you could be outraged about when it comes to the January 6th plot, up into leading his rhetoric that, sends all these people down to the Capitol, storm the Capitol. And, that to me, when you put it all together, the political conspiracy after the election day in 2020, the premeditation that you're not going to concede if you lose the election, then with all the behavior between election day and January 6th, pushing all these buttons, trying to interfere with the electoral college certification process, trying to get, bully Republicans into doing your will to overturn the election, all the way up to January 6th, where he gives this incendiary speech, where, by the way, his apologists, they cite, Bill, they cite the one line in the speech where he says peacefully and patriotically, and they say, well, that absolves him of all responsibility, and it's exculpatory for inciting the riot. Well, yeah, but if you look at the rest of the speech, of course, that one phrase is completely inconsistent with the rest of it, where, of course, he also tells the crowd to fight, and if they don't, they won't have a country anymore. That's the point, right? If you look at his machinations within the executive branch, you look at him using the bully pulpit to go after other Republicans downstream, you look at what he did to incite people up to and on January 6th, and then his behavior during the riot or during the attack, you put that all together, and all of it's outrageous, right? It's all part of an outrageous package. You could strip out any one part of it and still find it outrageous,
Yeah, no, it's really striking. Well, I like your formula. Let's talk about going to the prospective side of it. I like your formulation in the sense. I mean, Trump was helped in the election by the fact that lots of stuff didn't go as badly in his first term as it might have. There was some guardrails, a lot of them internal, a lot of them, some of the people he appointed, many of whom he then fired, but they were there for 1, 2, or 3 years and could stop a lot of things or slow down a lot of things. And some of the people at the very end were still, General Milley was chairman of the Joint Chiefs and so forth. And other people, it turns out, senior officials in the Justice Department, even after Barr left, stopped certain things. And Pence, very important. So, but I think your formulation that we're not dealing with that's the American public got a little reassurance out of that. But the fact is, the Trump second term now looks more to be the Trump presidency that he wanted from November 3rd to January 20th, as
Right.
opposed to what he actually did for most of those first 4 years. So talk about what sort of how you think about his thinking about the second term and what evidence we have. And I suppose the main evidence we have so far are some things he says he's going to do, but mostly it's the actual nominations, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the nominees are all trying to substitute out people who were not 100% yes men, but we're maybe 98 or 99% yes men for 100% yes men, and that's what's sort of scary to me about the whole process. I mean, you look at, we now have, I mean, the most remarkable thing to me to this day is how Vice President Pence was ejected from the MAGA movement and became persona non grata simply because he wouldn't help Trump overturn the election. Well, now you have Vice President elect Vance, who, in fact, one of his selling points is he says he would have done what Pence refused to do. And I wrote a piece for the Bulwark on that, a little while ago as well. And there's no legal or historical or constitutional basis for Vance saying that. It's purely because this will that Trump has that he wants his vice president to do it, that Vance would say he would do it. And you look at the other sort of appointees, they're all people who are going to carry forward Trump's agenda and do what Trump wants them to do. I mean, we talk about, Pam Bondi, who I think, certainly strikes me as a loyalist. But Kash Patel is probably the super loyalist to Donald Trump. He's somebody who has gone out of his way to justify every last thing that Donald Trump has done wrong, or to try and defend him against his critics, and often wielding conspiracy theories to do so. And to me, somebody like Kash Patel, there's probably no limit on what he's willing to do or say for Donald Trump.
So let's talk about Patel. You wrote that excellent piece yesterday, you and Norm Eisen at the Bulwark. And again, Patel, it's one thing, it's bad enough to have such a person as a aide in the White House, a press flack, a spokesperson, going on TV saying ridiculous things. It's another thing to have that person heading the FBI. So talk about Patel as a potential director of the FBI, in particular, what he said about the FBI in the course of promoting these conspiracy theories.
I probably have a little bit of a different take on Patel because, and let me back up for a second before we get to conspiracy theories. So I'm a firm believer, and you can see I've testified for Congress, House, and Senate many times as a Republican witness, by the way. And I've always called for transparency, oversight, and accountability of federal agencies, executive branch. I think the FBI needs to be held in check and needs strict oversight. So do all the federal agencies, and they do things that are wrong, and they need to be called out on it. And Patel sort of cut his teeth on the House Intelligence Committee working for Devin Nunes, on the so-called Russia investigation. Some of what Patel has said about that and how he's characterized that, I don't think is accurate at all. He does have a few points that he's right about. I do think that, some of the things that happened with Carter Page and how, the FBI and Department of Justice were going to justify, some surveillance and that kind of thing. He actually has some valid points there, But what he and others have done is they take a few things that are right and or are objectionable, and they build this whole mountain range of grievances and victimology out of it, And so what you find is there's really no limit, right, with Kash Patel. And what he's done is he's gone full sort of InfoWars style conspiracy theories on January 6th in particular. And InfoWars, by the way, helped rile the crowd up for January 6th and Alex Jones. And now you have this real cognitive dissonance where some people on that side will also try and blame the deep state or blame the FBI for January 6th. And what you see in the piece that we wrote for the Bulwark is that Kash Patel has been trafficking in this stuff, insinuating or suggesting or sometimes making arguments, that, basically blame the FBI for January 6th and try and say that January 6th, using its confidential human sources, somehow instigated the attack. And of course, there's no evidence for that. There's never been any evidence for that. The FBI did have confidential human sources on the ground January 6th, mainly because they were providing sources of information on right-wing extremists, including the right-wing extremists that actually did instigate the attack, namely the Proud Boys, But what you find is that Patel has endorsed these conspiracy theories and has, again, insinuated or suggested that somehow the FBI was responsible on multiple occasions. And so we're left, this is really striking, right, Bill? I mean, you're left in a situation here where the FBI director could be somebody who has essentially tried to shift blame from Trump and the right-wing extremists and the normies who got riled up on January 6th to the FBI itself for January 6th. I mean, that's really an incredible moment,
Yeah, and then he will, right, that itself is incredible. It should certainly come up in a big way at the confirmation hearings. And then he'll be in charge of the FBI, which can launch investigations obviously on citizens based on, to some degree, on some predicates. Sometimes their internal guidelines require some factual predicates, but those guidelines can be waived, and some investigations can be run right out of the director's office. And I was talking with someone who served in the FBI who was explaining some of this to me. You got a lot of power if you're director of the FBI. So that's all I meant when I said it's not quite like being White House press secretary, where you could do a lot of damage to the country by imputing other people and so forth. But you can't actually order, let's go have surveillance of this person, and let's also, as people start to quit because they hate what's happening, let's recruit 20 agents who are Trump loyalists and so forth, or 200.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be easy to launch a phony investigation into the January 6th committee, for example, including its members and its staffers, potentially even me, right? I mean, based on nothing, I mean, like, you see stuff like that Trump says where, the committee destroyed all the evidence. I still don't even know what he's even talking about there. I don't even know what they're suggesting. It doesn't even make any sense. And of course, Congressman Loudermilk in Congress has, hurled all sorts of specious accusations. But it's striking to me, and this is why I think this is all autocratic or authoritarian, Bill, right? If you think about it, Loudermilk and the House Republicans have spent more time now investigating the January 6th committee than the January 6th committee even existed, right? And so it shows like there's like an obsession on their part that they have to rewrite this history. They have to whitewash this history and this narrative for dear leader, for Donald Trump. And that to me strikes me as definitely a warning sign of authoritarianism, and certainly autocratic, because you have to, they're so insistent on trying to vindicate and protect dear leader that they're going to continue attacking or have continued to attack the people who simply investigated what he did,
No, that's so important. It's a better formulation, honestly, than I think I had in the newsletter this morning. But we can also look at the way I try to also make the point that it's not just that, they want to be nice to Trump, or Trump doesn't like these investigations of him. That's understandable, I guess, and doesn't like the truth about January 6th. Even that's understandable and not admirable, but you can see why he doesn't want the truth to come out. But he's fearful of the truth coming out. I think there is a sense in which Trump understands he wouldn't have won if he hadn't succeeded in rewriting the story of January 6th. I mean, if 65% of Americans thought January 6th was a total disgrace, what Trump said it was, incidentally, the day after January 6th, they wouldn't vote for the guy who clearly was behind it and had been defending it for the last 2 years and praising it for the last 2 years. So that was so key to his success over the last 4 years, the rewriting of the narrative of January 6th. And some people, as I say, simply went along with the whitewashing. Others went along with excusing. Others were all in, like Patel, on conspiracy theories and so forth. But I think Trump has this instinct that he needs that also going forward. Authoritarian movements need to have a kind of origin story that is, which they're the victims or the heroes, or both. But but they didn't do something terrible to get the whole thing going, right? I mean, and I do think that's why I was in some TV show the other night, and the kind of nice, sensible lawyers were talking, and it was like, I can't understand why Trump's obsessed with this. Why he should go forward and advance his policy agenda? But he's not foolish in a way to be obsessed with it. It's bad for the country, but I mean, you know what I mean? He understands that his own success and status almost depends on accepting this untrue version of January 6th.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the heart of MAGA really is victimology and grievances, right? I mean, you look at how Trump communicates with his base of supporters, you look at any of his speeches, it's one grievance after another, after another, after another. And when it comes to the truth of January 6th and the lead up to it, he's not the victim, right? He's not the person who's being oppressed. He's not the innocent who was wronged. He's the aggressor. He's the one who's on the attack. And so the truth of January 6th kind of inverts MAGA's whole worldview, right? Because it turns Trump from this innocent protector of the MAGA movement and the supposed American people into this aggressor who's actually trying to overturn our democracy in a democratic held election for the first time in our nation's history. It really punctures their disfigured patriotism as well, because remember, they've wrapped, just as Trump hugged a flag and has done sort of really bizarre things like that. They've really wrapped themselves in Trump and in the American flag and perceive themselves as the true patriots. And so the truth of January 6th undermines that as well, because there's nothing less patriotic than sacking the American Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, and trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in our history. So this is why it's so important for them, to my view, to rewrite the history of January 6th. Is they have to justify their own ideology, their own sort of outlook on things. And that's really probably what concerns me the most.
Yeah, and then that's of course why the big lie is so important. He's a victim. He becomes the victim, however, once again, if the election was stolen from him by all these conspiratorial deep state forces. So, well, he was trying to do.
And then the January 6th committee, which again has been disbanded for 2 years, by the way, right? We haven't even existed for 2 years. Loudermilk and Republicans investigated us for those 2 years, right? The committee, and the January 6th committee becomes the boogeyman. The January 6th committee, which was a congressional body that held some hearings and had a report and has been disbanded for 2 years, they become in MAGA world, the person who victimizes Trump and the people around him. I mean, that's kind of the sickness at the heart here of what's going on, which really is worrisome.
And it's ludicrous, but it is. I mean, I think it's important to note that for, let's say, people out there who have been following that closely, there's a report by a congressman that's supported by other members of Congress that says there are huge problems with the January 6th committee. It needs to be investigated. Attorney General, the FBI director are just going to launch an investigation, as an important member of Congress has asked. What's wrong with that? I mean, the degree to which they will have a certain amount of running room uh, without without their true motives being quite as exposed as they should be, unless we succeed in getting people to know everything Patel has said, everything, as you say, about the committee and so forth, and the Loudermilk. I think some people on the anti-Trump side underestimate how persuasive, or at least that's not quite the right word, but this sort of legitimizes what they're going to do, or at least it makes people uncertain. Well, maybe there's something there. Why shouldn't they take a look? And that kind of thing, right?
Exactly. I mean, all they need is a thin veneer to justify what they want to do, and that's what's so different. I mean, look. I mean, you look at the polling that was done on January 6th itself, and you had a significant percentage of Republicans that believed the FBI did it and was instigated it, or they didn't know, right? And that was great polling that was in the Washington Post and elsewhere. I mean, again, when you're living in this broken reality, all bets are off, right? About what can be used and what people can do, because they're not living in a rational standard, or by a reasonable standard, right? You can have, again, the story of January 6th is you can prove our side of the story, which is reality, purely from the four walls of Republicans, purely within the four walls of Republican testimony and what they said about what Trump did. You don't need to go outside of that. And yet the bubble that they've created is it's all about the Democrats and the media and the establishment. They're somehow victimizing Donald Trump, to this day. And that really, when you see that kind of dichotomy, that there's this vast reality over here that's being ignored and being downplayed and whitewashed, really all bets are off and they can do anything.
Yeah, and just to close way beyond this thought, but the all bets are off. The thing you've been stressing why it's so worrisome is just to put a point on this. It's one. Look how much they did when they weren't in power. Trump was a candidate. He was the head of the party. He won the nomination. He was a candidate for president. But now he's going to be president, and he'll have, whether it's Patel or not, he'll have the FBI directors and attorney generals who are responsive to him and others, and the bully pulpit of the White House. The degree to which it's going to be, they will have the chance to really deepen their narrative, persuade more people, at least make it hard for others to wean away anyone from what they bought into, right? I mean, Trump's not going to get weaker in the next, I don't think, unfortunately, month to 2 or 3. He hasn't even begun as president doing these things, saying these things, giving his own, using the bully pulpit himself, but also giving it to many other people to advance these conspiracy theories and these lies. So that's
I
why
mean,
I think it really is people have to be alarmed as they think ahead of what it's going to look like 2, 4, 6 months from now, not
yeah.
just, right now.
I mean, that's a big story of why the big lie took hold in 2020 through January 6th, right? Is because you have the president of the United States using the most powerful bully pulpit on the planet, the bully pulpit of the presidency, from the Oval Office, from all these different locations he would go with the presidential seal, telling the American people the election was stolen. And he was a victim of this, Democrat conspiracy against our democracy. A big part of the reason why that takes hold is because people see the president of the United States saying it, and that kind of power. And when you abuse that kind of power, that's why it's so damaging for everything, and there's no reason to believe he won't continue to do that once he gets inaugurated.
And he didn't have Bill Barr saying it much, and he didn't have the FBI director saying
Right.
it. And so now we'll have, didn't have the SecDef saying it, and in those at least in the run
And
up to the
Democrats
election.
are out of power on both the House and
Yeah.
the
So
Senate.
this
So
is where it gets, ugh. One last thing, we have a minute. Let me just ask you about this. You've said this to me for a couple of years, and I've always been struck by it, and I don't think other people see it. You mentioned Alex Jones in passing, who's the InfoWars guy who,
mhm,
was found guilty, I guess, right, of libel
defaming
for
it.
defaming
Yeah.
the Sandy Hook
Mhm.
parents and so forth. Um, you've always said he's more central than people realize, or the whole party has now moved over to where he was when he was regarded a few years ago as a total outlier and
Yep.
almost crazy person. Just to say a word about that, I always was struck with you.
I think a seminal moment in all this is when Donald Trump in December 2015 goes on InfoWars and endorses Alex Jones. He talks about how great of a reputation Alex Jones has. and he welcomes the InfoWars coalition. This is something that was brokered by Roger Stone, a longtime advisor to Trump, who also worked with Alex Jones on InfoWars. He welcomes InfoWars into his political coalition. He brings them into MAGA as part of the political coalition, that audience, this rabid audience that's really willing to believe any conspiracy theory that you throw at them as long as it's aimed at the right targets. That is a seminal moment, I think, in the history of our modern politics, because you can draw a direct line from December 2015 to January 6th. I mean, you look at one of the principal advocates of the Stop the Steal movement in 2020, somebody who used the show to rile up people and advance all these deep state conspiracy theories and all the stuff that really led to January 6th. Alex Jones, InfoWars play a key role in all that. And that mindset, I think, has really spread like wildfire across the MAGA right. I think that sort of conspiratorial mindset, you look at Tucker Carlson and how he was modeling his show on Fox News before he was ousted. He's clearly modeling it after Alex Jones. And in fact, one of the first things he does once he's ousted from Fox News is embrace Alex Jones on his show and have him on. And they have a picture, online on Twitter or X, I guess it was. This stuff has really caught on. I mean, this type of conspiratorial thinking, and it's central really to how the political right has views itself and views the country and views the government. And I don't know how we get out of it.
Yeah, kind of a not the most uplifting note to end on, but a true and important note. And we will have more conversations about, actually, since we do know something about conspiracy theories and maybe how they can be dented a little bit at least. It's something we can talk about next time. But Tom, anything else to say, or that I think we've covered this? This has been terrific from my point of view, really. So thank you.
No, I always tend to be a Debbie Downer on this.
No, well, look, in life is sometimes Debbie Downers are right, and it's important, honestly, that people not be kidding themselves that, well, this is a little temporary thing we're going through, and 3 months from now, it's all going to be fine. I hope it is, but when it's foolish to just assume that, right?
We're a decade in. We're a decade into this now. So
I know, it's amazing.
I mean, and I think there are a lot of people who are exhausted by it, but I think if you're going to try and hold the line for reality, that I maybe sound like a Debbie Downer, but you got to try and fight for a new day, right?
Totally,
and a better day.
Totally. Well, thank you for your fighting. Thank you, really, for the excellent piece yesterday, January 6th, on the Bulwark, and thank you for joining me for this discussion, which will be. I hope people will benefit from. I'm sure they will, because so it's been good to be reminded of and of some of these things, and both about January 6th in general, the committee report, and then of course about Kash Patel. We'll see what happens in his confirmation hearings. And Tom, thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks, Bill.